Hey everybody, so excited to have you guys join us. This is a special treat. These gentlemen, Rob and Mike, they're inspectors here in the North Texas, Collin County, and they're gonna teach us around what it is to own a home, what it is to buy a home, and just educate us on the process of it. So, gentlemen, thank you guys. Thank you guys for this opportunity to have you guys and just to inform everybody about what this is gonna be like.
Thank you, Juan. Appreciate the invitation to be here and talk to you guys today. I'm Rob and this is Mike and we're with Green State Inspection Service. Today we're gonna talk to you a little bit about the major systems of the home and how to identify problems with those systems. So if you're looking at buying a home, these are the 5 areas that you want to concentrate on. They are foundation, electrical, HVAC, plumbing, and roof. Not necessarily in that order, but those are the most important systems of the home. If there's something that needs to be repaired or corrected or replaced with those, it's usually big bucks. So let's talk about foundation first. Foundations in North Texas are a little bit different than foundations in other areas of the country in that we're dealing with expansive clay soil here. That's the biggest difference in North Texas versus any other climates or areas. It expands and contracts as it gets wet and dry. And so this is something you have to consider when you're looking at the home. Is that there are normal changes that take place in the home. I'll say common changes that take place in the forms of cracks, shifting, movement of building materials that we will call normal settlement that take place as the temperatures change and as the moisture content changes in the soil. Think about it as building a house on a sponge. When the sponge gets wet, it expands. When it gets dry, it contracts. All of that is movement. Movement is undesirable around a foundation. So to keep that movement from taking place, you want to make sure that you water your yard. So if you're listing your house, if you're going to sell your house, you want to make sure that any indications of foundation shifting that have to do with the soil shrinking and contracting, things like that, are dealt with before that you get to that point. If you're buying a house, you're looking at the changes, any cracks in the walls, things like that, gaps where soil may be pulling away from a house, and we'll show you some examples of those in just a minute.
Okay, awesome. Well, let's go take a look at those. So Rob, what are you looking at here?
So this is a really good example, one of what we call corner pop effect type crack. It's where the corner cracks in a diagonal type shape like this. Okay. And this is very common for any home in North Texas that has cladding. This is referred to cladding, wall covering here, either brick or stone or any masonry type of product that's heavier than wood or stucco. Okay. We don't find these cracks on wood houses and stucco clad houses that much. What's happening is you have a post-tension reinforced slab. So you have tension pulling inward here and inward here, 6 inches around the corner. And then you have the way the brick bearing down, it's pushing on the corner of the slab where the load is also doubled. So the little corner here doesn't have a chance. It's going to crack at some point, and it always cracks diagonally like that. So when it does this, people tend to respond to it because it's a crack and it's in the foundation. And when we write it up in a report, we have to call it a crack. And it is a deficiency, but it's what engineers refer to as not significant. It's not structurally significant. They call it cosmetic, but cosmetic is more visual to us. So we call it a crack and we write it up. If you don't want that written up in your house, then just seal it with what we call concrete patch, is a product that we kind of recommend. You can pick it up at any home improvement store, and it goes on just like patching, just like a spackling, and you can apply it with your hand or with a spackling knife. And once you apply that, there is no longer a crack. It's been repaired, right? So that's what we look for. If I walk up to this corner and I'm expecting to see a crack because it's a brick-clad house and it's patched, there's nothing for me to report.
Okay. There's nothing for you to report if it's already okay. So then, in a nutshell, what you're saying is, though, even though that this is labeled a deficiency, it doesn't sound like a corner pop is
structurally
should be a deal breaker.
Correct.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Because it's just a natural flow. Okay.
Yeah. So just to get used to seeing this, this is something you're going to see in any brick or stone clad house in North Texas.
Okay. Good to know.
The other thing about this corner is, when we talked a little bit about soil movement, you see the gap here where I can place my hand all the way down in there like that. That's the result of the soil shrinking, meaning it's not getting enough water. So when the soil moves like that, that's that movement that we're trying to prevent by watering. If you look at the house right next to us, you see there's a black hose that goes around that garden. trim right there, that's a soaker hose. Soaker hoses are ideal for our soil conditions in North Texas because they discharge water at a very low rate. The soil has an absorption rate that's very slow too, so it's ideal for watering around the perimeter of your house. So we always recommend using soaker hoses around the perimeter of the foundation. But this is a classic example of the seller just not watering their yard adequately. But it is a deficiency. We call it dry edge foundation or dry edge soil movement, and we write it up as a deficiency with regard to grade around the house. And again, it means that they're just not watering enough. One of the results of this that can happen on a house when you're letting the soil get too dry is the foundation will actually move down on the edges. It's called dry edge roll off. That forces the walls to pop out a little bit, and the result is what you see up here. That's a freeze board, and where the corners are usually mitered correctly tight like that, they'll start to open up a little bit. That's another example of this is what happens when you don't water the soil adequately around your foundation. Okay?
So it sounds like watering the foundation is preventative.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a necessary thing that you have to do if you live in North Texas, especially if you're buying a house or maintaining a house. This is part of it. Right?
I know that with all the houses that we've owned, I know that I don't have a house that doesn't have a crack in it. They just, even watering it, even having a timer on it, there seems to be an even flow in the movement. And that's just the way my houses have gone.
That's what happens. So looking at foundations, when I'm walking around a foundation, if I don't see a corner pop, I'm thinking to myself, wow, somebody's doing a real good job of watering the soil around this house. Yeah. Because they're on just about every house.
It's immaculate. It's immaculate watering.
Correct. Yeah.
And with the weather here, it gets it's challenging with the weather.
North Texas, it's the middle of the summer is going to be your most exciting time because that's when it stops raining.
Yes.
Right? So that's when you start discovering how much water you have to pour in your lawn to keep it from moving like this.
Middle of summer, super hot. This is,
North Texas.
There it is. All right, let's take a look then on some inside cracks. Does that sound good to you? Okay. What do we got here? Go ahead.
So now we're on the inside of the house, guys, and some of the things that you'll commonly see on homes in North Texas is settlement. Now, settlement is a word that we overuse in North Texas. It's just a nicer way of saying your house is moving. And part of what we discussed outside about the soil conditions, where if it gets too dry, it shrinks and that creates movement, and it gets wet, it expands, that creates movement too. Typical settlement happens within the first 2 years after you buy the house. And it's really refers to the shrinkage of the materials used to build the house. Seasonal settlement this is a good example of it right here. Okay. This is the type of cracks you see right above. That's a load-bearing column right there. This is a load-bearing corner right here. And the outside walls of the house are not really attached to the frame structure, but with little ties that attach to them. So the roof structure of the house is separate from the wall framing. And any movement that takes place outside in the soil affects the walls more than it does the roof structure. Roof structure is going to hold together because it's framed together as one module. So it's not going to move, but the interior walls will move. And so these are typical, what we call settlement type cracks, which is a nicer way of saying you have some structural movement taking place.
You got some movement.
Again, we look at this in North Texas as it's very common. So when you see this inside a home, don't despair. Any home that's 2 years or older is going to have these types of cracks. What we recommend when we inspect a house like this is that this is common for home this age in this region. We recommend repairing so that if it cracks again, you have active movement taking place, meaning you're not watering the yard enough, right?
Right. So, a lot of times I, as a realtor, end up giving them this sort of information. I'm so glad we're getting this so that people can just look at this and have this conversation even before I go show them homes as a real estate agent. So thank you for sharing this. This right here visually is the one that freaks people out, right? They walk in the house, they're like, why is there a crack why is the house moving away from itself? So I'm so glad we're going over this. Thank you.
Particularly if you're coming from another area of the country and the soil that your house is built on is more sandy, loamy, or gravelly, which is more ideal for foundations. Not that the foundations here are bad. It's the soil. We're constantly fighting and challenged by the movement of the soil that takes place. So yeah, this is very common.
Love it.
It's for homes of all ages.
All right. Well, great. Well, all right. Let's take a look at the fog windows.
So this is another area of the home that we're going to point out some really common effects. Above my head, you'll see a window that's an arch-shaped window. You see the moisture that is trapped in there. It looks like fogging. We call it fogging, but we call any evidence of moisture intrusion between double pane windows, which are thermal windows, as fogging. It's just kind of a vernacular that we use to describe that. What's happening here is you've got a thermal window that has an insulation level installed between the two glass panes. It's usually argon gas, and it's always argon gas. In an older house, it's going to be just argon gas. In a newer house, you're going to have what they call low E windows, which has polarization, which also cuts down on the temperature exchange, the amount of temperature coming through the window, right? Which is what we're trying to prevent, right? That's called the thermal characteristics of the window. So if I'm looking at a window that has double panes and it has a layer of argon gas in it, that's the original setup of the window. That's how it's manufactured. It has its original thermal characteristics. When I see fogging inside a window, that means that the thermal seals between the two panes have been compromised. There's a crack somewhere where moisture's getting in. If moisture's getting in, that means the argon gas has gotten out. So this window no longer contains its original thermal characteristics. So what does that mean to me, right? If I'm a home buyer and I'm looking at that window, I'm thinking, well, if I replace this window at a cost of about $100 to $150 per panel, right? Some windows may be more, some windows might be less. That's an arch-shaped window. It might be a little bit more, maybe 200, maybe 225. But if I replace this window, is it going to pay for the replacement over time? Am I going to save enough on my utility bills? Well, with argon gas windows, which is the older protocol, which is 1980s, 1990s houses, the difference in thermal deficiency or in thermal efficiency is about 3 to 6%, which is not huge. So if you multiply that 3 to 6% against your utility bills, how long is it going to take me to pay for that $200 window or $220? It's not your normal amortization rate that you would expect of 3 or 4 to 6 years. It's more like 40 years, right? So it becomes a question of what can I tolerate visually. Looking at that window right now, that's kind of the first thing that I see when I walk into the bathroom. So I would probably pay to have that replaced just because visually that's something that would bug me a little bit.
And this is from the real estate side of like the negotiating side. So just your thought. The glass, replacing the glass versus replacing the whole window.
Oh, I'm sorry. Frame. Let me clarify. So when I say replace the window, what I mean is just the glass. There's no reason to replace that whole window. And really, there's never a reason to replace the entire window unless the window frame is compromised or broken or rusted or something like that, which rarely happens. It's always the glass panel. And that's why I say about $150 to $225, depending on the shape.
If they did want to replace that window, what's the difference in cost? Just generally speaking, what's your thought?
The difference in cost in that
between the glass and the window.
Oh, the glass and the window. I'm not that familiar, Juan, with the cost of replacing the entire window. Gotcha. But it's probably 3 or 4 times the cost of just the glass panel.
Right. Yeah, that sounds about
right. And depending on what level of quality you desire in your window selection.
All right, so we have a different style of foundation, or at least possibly something to look at. Yeah, to do with the ceiling. Tell us about
this is another area where this is something that it might cause you pause when you're going through a house and looking at it. Cracks, and cracks are what we look at as, there must be some foundation movement taking place. This is a classical example of what we call a thermal expansion crack. If you look at the configuration of the roof right here and you walked outside, you'd see that this slope right here comes down at the same slope outside, right? That means there's no attic above this roof structure right here. There's 6 inches of framing and then a roof. So you have underlayment, sheathing, and shingles on top of that. So this drywall in this area, as opposed to the drywall in the walls, does not have any insulation between the drywall and the outside temperature, right? So there's really no thermal buffer there to keep the temperatures the same. So what happens is the drywall on this section of the roof, in this section right here, but not the wall, expands and contracts at the same rate, right? So we have different rate going on this wall. So insulation inside this wall, no insulation inside that roof. What you're going to have is the gypsum inside the drywall expands a little bit and contracts because the temperature outside is affecting the temperature of the drywall as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if you ever see the weatherman on TV and they're predicting a big storm, they'll say, well, you got hot coming down from this area and cold coming up from this area, and that's where all your activity takes place. And it's the same thing with a home. When you have temperatures changing, hot on one side, cold on another, those materials that are prone to expansion and contraction are going to expand and contract at different rates. That's what causes this type of crack. So it's kind of important to understand when you see something like that, don't despair. That's not foundation. That's the temperature outside the home.
That's good to know. I think you covered that so thoroughly. I don't have any questions. That was
good deal.
Very well explained.
There's another example. If you look straight up there,
see if you can get that one.
Yeah, there's a crack that's taking place right there. Another classic example of thermal expansion. The other thing that takes place is you'll see this from time to time is nail pop effect. And if you move just beyond, just to the center there, there's a nail. You see the rusty nail head right there. There is no protocol for nails in drywall application. We don't call them, there's no drywall nails. There's no such thing. Now, there are drywall screws, and that's what you're supposed to attach drywall with. If I'm a drywaller, I keep a couple of nails in my tool belt just to hammer one in real quick to hold up that drywall while I'm reaching for some other tools or something else to help hold it in place. And then I might forget about it and not come back to it and remove it. And so what happens is nails have shear strength. They prevent this from taking place. They don't prevent that from taking place. That's tensile strength. That's what screws have. So when the nail gets hot and cold, it expands and contracts and it moves out of place. That's what's taking place right there. So it's kind of, that's another thing that we do right up on houses. So if you're buying a house and you see that, again, it's very rarely is it the sign of a leak or anything like that. It's always temperature change.
Right. I love it. So if I can just say this real quick, I just love having Rob and Mike as my go-to inspectors. As you can tell, wealth of knowledge. They educate you so you understand what things are on a super high level. They understand the North Texas market, North Texas soil. How can people get a hold of you? What's the best way in case they want to have a chat and say, hey, I saw your video, but tell me more about this.
Just call us or email us. We have a website. So if you Google Green State Inspection Service or inspectors, we should pop up on the first page there somewhere. There's a lot of green this and green that, but it's Green State is the name of our company.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much.